So this morning, I'm going to spend a little bit of time letting you know what it is we've learned from doing Holy Cow assessments in the presbytery in our churches for the last 3 years. First of all, if you haven't done a Holy Cow assessment, let me tell you a little bit about what happens when you do one. What you're getting when you do an assessment is what your own people are saying about your congregation. You choose who gets the survey. So you can poll just members, you can poll members and friends, but you choose what, and you're getting what they think about your congregation. And then that's compared to 5 years of data with other churches in the database. And those churches are mainline Protestant churches like our congregations are. So they're Presbyterian, Lutheran, Episcopal, Methodist. Um, and the tools will give us several things. When you get a vital sign report back, it will give you pattern recognition. So how is your energy reflected in what people feel when they come into your congregation, for instance? Energy and satisfaction often go together, they're correlated. It will give you collective awareness. What is the whole of your congregation think? Instead of hearing, well, so-and-so complained about this, or so-and-so is really excited about that, what do people across the board in your congregation think? You will get peer awareness. How does your congregation compare to other congregations? What are you doing exceptionally well at that you're so wonderful at compared to other congregations? What are you doing that's normal, even though you might worry that it's not? What are you doing that's problematic? And you'll get as well qualitative awareness. What is the quality of your shared life together as a congregation? Without this kind of self-awareness, the gaps between words and behavior often become invisible. And when they're invisible, then when we say we want to move into the future and do our ministry in an even better way, it becomes hard to know how to do that. So making these things visible gives us a first step in that direction. When you do a Holy Cow assessment, we pay to bring in a very, very well-regarded interpreter to help you figure out what the data is saying, whether the data that's collected correctly reflects the rest of what you know about your congregation's life, because data doesn't tell you everything, and helps you figure out which places might you use your energy to best get the most response and the most reaction and positivity out of that. So we hope you'll consider doing a new assessment every 3 years, because that's the time generally it takes for the climate of a church to show change. And the presbytery is committed to paying for the interpreter to do that for you and come in and help you with understanding your results every 3 years as part of that. So far, 49 of our congregations, 2/3 of them, have now engaged with Holy Cow, and we have a few others coming up later this spring. That means we're at a point where we can easily begin to see patterns in the churches in our presbytery, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So congregations have used Holy Cow assessments for a whole series of different things. COM has had it take the place of that long drawn out mission study that used to be done after a pastor leaves. Our multi-year grants are now asking for a interpretation as a first step towards coaching to make sure the goals of that grant are reached. We have had congregations that are considering whether to merge together, congregations that are considering whether to do a joint witness together, use the Holy Cow interpretation to figure out whether those congregations would work well together. We've had congregations that aren't sure what their energy is and think, well, should we close or not? Use it to decide, well, no, I can do this new thing, or no, I should close. We've had congregations use it for new ministry projects. The new pastor salary support program is going to be using it. Major decisions of all different kinds are using it. Where should we put our next energy? Visioning and mission priorities have been using it. So a lot of different ways that congregations have been using it over these last 3 years, all of which look at the material and help figure out how you move into the next year and the next years of your congregation's life together. One of the key charts in Holy Cow is what is often called the climate chart. And what it does is it maps energy and satisfaction. Energy and satisfaction are the key to planning, to having a high morale, to getting along with each other. It's the climate you feel in a church when you walk in the door, the same way you would feel the climate, the weather, if it's raining outdoors or if it's sunny outdoors and humid, or satisfaction is basically feeling of, do I belong? Am I at peace? Do I feel whole in this place? And energy is our sense of purpose, our passion. Are we engaged in the congregation? So there are four quadrants that put these together. The first of them is on the upper left. It's where you see the word chaos. A congregation that has a lot of high energy but low satisfaction basically is called a chaos congregation, because it is a congregation where there's lots of energy going in lots of different directions, but no central purpose. And so there are competing interests going on that lead to a chaotic atmosphere, an environment that feels like it's got conflict going on. And this is a chaos church is vulnerable to member loss, because you come in and you think you're heading in this direction with this group, but another group is going in a different way. And we know from so far in the presbytery, we have two chaos congregations. When you're thinking of pastors or people to moderate these congregations, what you're looking for is someone who's not easily flustered, who understands family systems dynamics, who's good at conflict management, and can help that congregation align their energy and move ahead together. In the lower right, you'll see static, the word static. That's a congregation that is low energy, high satisfaction. These are congregations where people love the church, but they lack the energy at this point to make changes that are necessary for effective ministry. There's no real drive for change in static congregations, because I have a deep appreciation for my congregational life, but I just don't have the energy to do anything else. And so I'm just going to stay with exactly where we are. In Hudson River Presbytery so far, we've had 5 static congregations, and you'll see where they map on the chart from those little dots. The way you might get a pastor to move into such a congregation in this quadrant is if a congregation was willing to hire someone to do the chaplaincy that this congregation needs to keep them happy and satisfied in that quadrant, while at the same time looking in the neighborhood to do some kind of new entrepreneurial ministry on the side. As we move into new worshiping initiatives, for instance, a congregation that's static might offer space to a new worshiping initiative as a way to bring new life into the campus at the same time that there's this constant congregational satisfaction that I would recognize as someone happy in my static church. In the lower left, you'll see a low energy, low satisfaction quadrant. And this is often called one of two things, a recovery quadrant or a reinvention quadrant. These are congregations that remember a church when it was more vital than it currently is. And so now it's not as vital. They're struggling to get a sense of purpose. What direction should I be going in? Many of these churches are backward looking at this point. We're doing programs and events because we've always done them that way, and they were really wonderful when we first began them. These are congregations that often mourn. Things are just not the way they used to be, rather than trying new things. And churches in this zone need to, first of all, change their flexibility so that they can create a timeline and criteria for what is going to be changing next. They need someone to help them rediscover why they're doing ministry. We have 16 congregations that are in this quadrant. These are churches that need a pastor that's going to take them back to basics, that's going to remind them why they're there, that's going to help them become more flexible, that's going to help them figure out how to be in their neighborhood in the 21st century, not back 15, 20, 30 years ago when they look back and remember other programs. The fourth quadrant in the upper right is what we call the transformational quadrant. This is a congregation that has high energy and high satisfaction. Churches that score in the upper part of this quadrant, and the 76th percentile or higher, are the one group of congregations that we know are statistically growing regularly. Churches in this quadrant need to keep pushing the envelope. They're doing everything well, but they need to keep pushing the envelope to avoid decline. And they do that in one of several ways. They can expand their facilities, they can grow, they can mentor another group, or they can go out and do some new kind of ministry and increase their external impact. In our presbytery, we have 23 transformational congregations. These congregations need a pastor who is an orchestra conductor, who won't micromanage, but will make a space for everyone to do what they do best. Most of our congregations are in one of two quadrants. They're either in the recovery quadrant or they're in the transformation quadrant. And we're beginning to think of ways to support each of these quadrants. So for transformational churches, for example, they need incentives to push the envelope. And for that kind of new ministry, we are offering presbytery grants, multi-year grants that could help them do that. For churches in the recovery quadrant, some of them with part-time pastors, they need to figure out how to get back to basics and with support, reach out to their neighborhood to become more involved there. And for that, we're trying our new pastor support salary support program. And then new worshiping initiatives are looking for ways to partner with churches in each of these quadrants and can provide one more way to work with congregations in each quadrant to help them do new ministries. Flexibility is the capacity of a church to make changes required to be effective in a particular context without having to invest large amounts of energy managing internal conflict. Generally, congregations think of themselves as flexible, and flexibility is the most significant factor in a culture's impact on church life. Russ Crabtree, who created Holy Cow Assessments, says that a flexible culture won't guarantee that a church can grow, but an inflexible church culture guarantees that it won't. So a lack of flexibility is an underlying cause of many different problems. Problems with the expectations of the pastor, problems with the decisions of the governing board, with eliminating programs that are no longer effective, with starting new programs to reach more people, with decisions around the style of furnishing or the color of furnishing or the bulletin boards or educational ministries. And so for congregations with average or below flexibility, which is 55% of our congregations, sessions need to start finding ways to build in making the congregation more comfortable with flexibility. One way to do that might be to put together a team to be coached in how to do that in specific ways in your congregation. Another might be for a pastor to call attention to being flexible as often as possible when the session and the congregation are talking about new programs and in worship and in one setting after another, so that the flexibility of the congregation increases. This is a chart of where our congregations are in the culture of a congregation. And today I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each of those cultures. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to answer questions for you at some other point. But today what I want you to notice is the line that runs horizontally across the chart and the dots up and down on that line. That's our theological perspective. And you will note that we have huge diversity of theology in this presbytery. Most people think of the presbytery as being a presbytery that is very progressive. That's the word on the street out in other presbyteries. If you look at our presbytery, if you look at all the way at the top left, you will see a congregation that is in the 100th percentile, right? All the way at the top left. One of our congregations, one of the most progressive in the country. And if you look on the line, the horizontal line that's in the middle of the chart, all the way on the right, you will see a congregation with a dot there. That's a congregation that's at the most conservative in the country. And then there are these dots on that line all across the way. We have congregations that are progressive and congregations that are conservative and everything in between. And so when you look at our congregations in the different quadrants, we have lots of different kinds of theology and lots of different kinds of culture. No one culture is better than any other culture. Right? They're different. They each have a good part to them, and they each have a shadow side to them. And they are, well, we have congregations in every one of those. And what we're trying to do as a presbytery is to keep this in mind as we go about events and programs for our congregations. Programs that can match these various different cultural uh, areas, so that we make sure when, for instance, we're talking about a leadership day coming up, that there will be things that will help and speak to each of the cultures that are being listed here on this chart. Holy Cow talks about what are called clergy-focused congregations. These are congregations in which 3 or more of the drivers of satisfaction are connected with a pastor. In other words, our congregation does what the pastor wants. The former pastor or the pastor was really good at pastoral care. The former pastor led us in worship. The former pastor helped us move into new ministry opportunities. These are called clergy focused if there are 3 or more, and they are churches that for our pastors are hard to serve. When things are going well in a clergy-focused congregation, the pastor is the one that's pointed to and is expected to keep it going. When things are going poorly, even if program has nothing to do with the pastor is usually the one that becomes the scapegoat and is blamed. And the vulnerabilities, aside from how hard it is for a pastor to serve this kind of church, the vulnerabilities are also there for the congregation because there's a loss of identity for the congregation. If you ask a pastor-driven congregation what they think about something, often the response is, well, Pastor so-and-so thinks that blah, 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 even though you've asked what the congregation thinks. What you're hearing is what the pastor wants to do instead. So in a clergy-focused congregation, often leaders become frustrated because decision-making is often very difficult. If you're trying to include the whole group, there's often a loss of trust, a loss of commitment to mission. Leaders, the pastors, either overfunction or burn out and underfunction. It's often an abdication of ministry from the perspective of the church. And when a pastor leaves, the congregation often feels rudderless. What are we supposed to do? Until the next pastor comes and tells us what to do, we're going in 90 different directions. So 40% of our congregations have pastor-focused congregations. That's a hard place for pastors to be. And I'm hoping that this year we will begin as a presbytery to find ways to respond to that. In the meanwhile, if you're from such a congregation, I hope you'll take advantage of the coaching program as one means of support, beginning to work on ways to shift from being a clergy-focused congregation. Most of our congregations are either internally focused, meaning they're apt to change things for those already in the congregation more than for outsiders, or externally focused. They're more apt to change things for others rather than for their own members. 28% of our congregations are internally focused, 2% are balanced right in the middle, and 70% are externally focused. And you'll see why this matters in a couple minutes. Hospitality. Every church thinks of itself, I think, as hospitable. And we know that hospitality and connection are often what matters the most. Our young adults, those under 24, are twice as likely these days, according to recent Pew studies, to be lonely than our seniors, those 66 and up are. And so hospitality is important across the board, letting people feel connected rather than left out. 42% of people since COVID now feel left out. And if our hospitality is high or very high, we retain people and we grow as a congregation at about 1% a year. If our hospitality is very low, or low or even average, the average statistics suggest that we drop our membership by about 1% a year. 70% of our congregations that have done Holy Cow are in this drop by 1% hospitality category. So we need to begin reweaving our social relationships in churches. And one of the ways we're going to try to help congregations begin to focus in this way is at our November Presbytery meeting, where the theme is going to be hospitality. And we'll be bringing in speakers to talk about things you might do to up your hospitality if you're in an average or low or very low congregation. When you put focus and hospitality together, you get another quadrant map, and they each tell you something about how a congregation responds. So if you have high hospitality and you have an inward focus, an internal focus, a strong internal relationships, they build up in the congregation. But you may have a hard time in those cohesive congregations risking conflicts that would come from changes that might help people out in the neighborhood, that might reach out into the neighborhood. We like what's going on internally. We have a hard time making changes for those external. And so while we have a lot of internal hospitality, right, we're going to have a hard time making the changes outside. 7% of our congregations are in the cohesive quadrant. If you look at the upper right, you'll see adhesive. These are congregations that have high hospitality and an external focus, where their relationships are strong and the church has a willingness to make changes to meet the needs of people that they want to bring in. So 23% of our congregations are in this quadrant, and it's easier for them to bring in people and have them stay and grow. In the lower left, you'll see chaplaincy. Chaplaincy is where there is low hospitality and an internal focus. These are places where the internal relationships are weak in a church, and the church is also not willing to make changes to reach those out in the community who aren't members of the church. The burden of care in this kind of congregation falls almost entirely to the pastor. And so we say to the pastor, we want you to bring in young families. We want you to do this and that. But there's no care within the congregation if the pastor is able to bring somebody in, and there's no effort from the congregation to go out and get people to come in or to go out and meet people where they are out on our streets in our neighborhoods. And so in this kind of congregation, it's very hard. It's chaplaincy. It's hard to grow. It's hard to increase in any way. 20% of our congregations are in this quadrant. And then the last quadrant, the lower right, is the dissonant quadrant. This is where there's low hospitality and an external focus. Here, the church has the experience meeting the needs of the people in the community. Yes, we will go out, we will change so we can reach you out in the community. But their internal relationships are weak. So what we find is people come into the congregation. Oh, they're great. We love this program you've been offering out in the community. We love that you're doing this feeding program. We love that you're out working with the homeless poor and meeting them where they are. We love that you're working on this new prison ministry. But when the people come in, it's hard to retain them because there's no internal hospitality in the space. They don't feel welcomed once they're inside. And sadly, 50% of our congregations are in this quadrant. So again, if you're a congregation with average or lower hospitality, stay tuned. We're going to focus a good percentage of our November Presbytery meeting on ways to improve congregational hospitality, and we'll be doing some other things during the year that will also help with that. In the meanwhile, one way to begin to change your quadrant here is to put together a team that can be coached to figure out how your specific congregation can become more hospitable.